Darwin was revolutionary in his field. He became looked up to, placed almost on a pedestal, where today you can walk through the streets and ask people, do you know who Darwin is and what was his theory? We did that. Let's play the clip and look at the responses.
I know he's a famous scientist. I don't know anything what he did, though.
He created the theory of evolution, believe it or not, based on Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, actually. He was a theologian from Cambridge University.
Charles Darwin, yes. Darwin theory. Survival of the fittest.
Evolution. Yeah, evolution, yeah.
Charles Darwin was a scientist, and his theory was the theory of evolution. Basically, we all came from like one core species, and they branched off. Yeah.
Origins of species. He developed thoughts of animal evolution, finches.
Theorist that didn't believe in God.
Charles Darwin was a naturalist, and he penned the theory of evolution, which would be natural selection evolves animals, or groups of animals evolve over a long time due to artificial selection.
He's the evolution guy who went to a bird island with some birds and saw how their beaks changed over time, and he came up with the theory of evolution.
Well, that's some interesting responses, and it ranged from one end of the spectrum to the other. Most people knew who he was and basics like evolution, and then some had more detail. Many recognized the finches, right? Darwin's famous finches on the Galapagos, and then some actually recognized the universal common descent component of Charles Darwin's theories of evolution. But if you notice, one of the men on the street there, he actually mentioned, he didn't believe in God. And yet, in the closing comments of his book on the origin of species, he said, we find that these things from a few forms or into one were created by a creator. And did he believe that? Can you talk about that for a second? Because he used the word by a creator in the closing comments of his book, only in certain editions.
And he grew up originally intending to be a clergyman.
Okay.
Eventually rejected that to be a naturalist and work on geology, biology, and so forth. Yeah. And I think had a wife who had a Christian background, so there was familial tension in his proposal of these ideas. In his writings, he would talk about things that seemed inconsistent with design. Mm-hmm. And so evolution effectively becomes a replacement for design.
Okay.
And if you look at what atheists write, this is the foundation for their views today. So whatever he personally believed, and I don't know that anyone can really get into his head, we're relying on what he's published and what he chose to share and what he chose not to share. But it is the foundation for an atheistic, materialistic worldview, and something that surprised me and I think explains some of the visceral nature of the reaction that you see when you bring up this topic, especially if you get closer and closer to people who are entrenched in science and whose career depends upon this being right.
Well,
there's a massive rejection of anything Christian. So the same surveys that show 90% of scientists accept evolution, at least 2/3 cannot positively affirm belief in God, which is, again, very different from the general populace. This is a community for whom you have to say, at least statistically, there's going to be a spiritual reaction to this as well, because maybe there's a God. Some say no God, some say, I don't know, but a small minority are going to be maybe in the camp of Christians.
But this great scientist, Charles Darwin, right? Now, did he have a degree in science?
I think he did some sort of studies. Not a PhD, which
but
is
not a PhD.
Another common.
But he used the words creator in certain editions of his book, and yet later he admitted in a letter, he said, I've long regretted that I truckled to public opinion and used this pentateuchal term of creator, by which I really meant appeared by some wholly unknown circumstance. Basically, he's admitting that he used the words by the creator to sell more books, to try to make it more palatable for people to believe in his theories. I mean, is that this kind of person that we should really be looking up to?
In one sense, I think we see it played out again and again today.
Yeah.
I was surprised that 2/3 of scientists you can't even call theists, because that's not what's projected to the public. And I think most of the public would be rather shocked and disturbed to find out that the people controlling cancer research, heart disease research, and everything else, because it's not a survey of those evolutionists, it's just members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, professional scientists. And by and large, these people don't want to have anything to do with, personally, anything theistic.
You brought a graph from a paper. If we could pull that up and reference that, it really shows the stark contrast in the scientific community, especially those who have PhDs in a scientific field. Tell me what we're looking at here.
So this is surveys of, on the far right here, for me, the U.S. adults, just the general populace, and then the other 3 columns here are AAAS members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the main professional scientific body in the United States. This is a survey question that's been done for many years. What's the origin of humans? And they give you basically 3 options with a I don't know answer as well thrown into for the mix. So have we evolved? And you can say due to natural processes. So no divine participation. You can say it's guided by a supreme being. Sort of a theistic evolutionary view. God guides evolution. Then there's the evolve, but I don't know.
Yes.
Sort of there's that last row down there, no answer.
No answer, yeah.
But then the creationist one, or at least what's typically called the creationist answer, is that the explanation, humans have existed in their present form since the beginning of time.
In other words, in the beginning, God created different kinds, basic family groups of animals, including humans, not including humans as an animal, but also he created humans specifically, and that they've existed pretty much the same since the beginning. Adaptations, mutations, things like that.
Not evolved from primates.
Right.
So 1/3 of U.S. adults still hold to that, and only 1/3 hold to this humans evolved by natural processes. And you can see 91% of PhD scientists hold to that. 90% of the AAAS members in general hold to that. It's that gigantic disconnect that causes much gnashing of teeth. Why can't we do a better job convincing the general public that evolution is true?
Right.
When so many of us, there's the consensus that's always referred to. All these smart people, how could all these smart people be wrong?
Yeah.
And the same question applies back to 1859. Darwin's peers.
But that's intimidating for the average U.S. adult to know, to realize that those apparently much more brilliant than they on scientific principles must have more information, right?
And what I noticed in the Man on the Street interviews is not one person mentioned he's that guy who challenged the consensus but somehow was successful despite.
I like
because
that.
That's not taught.
Okay.
That would contradict one of the main tools, one of the main clubs by which to beat creationists down and intimidate people. Those numbers are distressing. If you sit, you lay in bed at night like, how could all those people be wrong? 9 out of 10. How could they be wrong? And that's what the mainstream community wants you to think. And they probably do not want you to realize that those same types of numbers would apply in Darwin's day and would completely undermine their logic if people knew that.
In a nutshell, in about a minute, tell me how we can use these same principles that were present in Darwin's day to challenge the consensus.
I'd say, first of all, recognize it's not a logical argument. If we're going to say consensus determines truth, then we can get rid of evolution from the start. We're not even having a discussion anymore because it undermines itself. And secondly, I'd say, because there's this historical precedent, there's no reason to be intimidated by this. Revolutions are a regular feature of science. They just happen over timescales that are not necessarily as short as a human lifespan. And so we get lulled into thinking science is established fact, it never changes, when in fact it completely reverses itself over time. And we should not be surprised if it happens again. There's a lot of politics and money behind what's going on now. But a revolution could happen tomorrow, and this would not be anything tremendously new.